So we're about ready to start the live streaming. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, anyone watching. Welcome to the September meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, the 5th of June 2025. It's just gone 10 o'clock, so we'll get started with today's meeting. And before we move to item one, just to remind anyone that in terms of the style of the meeting, constitution of the Scrutiny Committee talks about the meeting being constructive, not judgmental, and that anyone giving evidence should be given due respect, not fail under attack. So there are ways of being constructive and critical without being overly assertive. Going straight on to the first item of the meeting is to confirm the minutes of the meetings held on the 15th of May and the 5th of June. Are members happy to agree the minutes of those two meetings, please? Yes. Thank you. Ruth, did we have apologies for absence, and if we note any substitute members attending? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from councillors David Blackburn, Lund, Richmond, Wickerson and Wilkinson, and we have substitutes Councillor Attewell for Councillor Wickerson and Councillor Monument for Councillor Richmond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I haven't got any announcements as chairman, and I haven't had any urgent business to declare. Moving on to item 5, which is a declaration of interest. Do members have any interest to declare? Not at all. Thank you very much. We note there are a number of non-members of the Commission who are present in the meeting who are welcome to contribute to address the meeting, contribute after members of the Commission have had their say. So welcome whether you speak or not. Thank you very much. In terms of the running order today, as it is on the agenda, so we're going to hear first of all from the executive member portfolio brief from Councillor Sarah Suggett, and then when Sarah has completed the presentation, we've had questions from members. We'll be having presentation from two of our providers, which are Flagship will be going first, and then Broadland, and then after those two providers done their presentation, we have questions to those two providers. So thank you very much to Sarah and her team for coming today. We've had the first half of Sarah's portfolio earlier in the year on planning. This is the other extensive responsibility, which is housing. I know you've got quite a few things to go over with you and your team. So the floor is yours, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And yeah, I'm really sorry, but you're going to be fed up of hearing my voice come the end of this, because as you can appreciate, it is a rather large portfolio. But thank you for the opportunity, everybody, for us to be able to update the Commission on the fantastic work that the Housing Service does continue to deliver. You'll be aware that the Council approved a new housing strategy in October last year. This was to address a number of housing-related challenges in Breckland, and 4 priorities were identified within the strategy. They are to increase the supply and diversity of affordable housing to ensure the right types of houses are available in the right places, to improve the quality and sustainability of homes, building thriving and healthy communities across Breckland, make better use of existing homes across the district, and finally to support vulnerable residents to access suitable homes and have housing choice. A comprehensive delivery plan sits alongside the strategy, and I'm pleased to report that in less than a year we have progressed 84% of the actions within the plan. This is a fantastic achievement made possible by collaborative work across the organisation as well within our partners. I'd like to share with you some key achievements by the housing service in meeting these actions. And like I've said, it's a rather large portfolio, so there's lots of sections. And if it's okay, we'll take questions questions at the end. So firstly, with regards to private sector housing, we continue to take a proactive approach in ensuring good standard of housing in the private rented sector. We investigated 195 service requests in the past year concerning hazards in rented accommodation and issued 67 enforcement notices for hazardous conditions. We continue to target the properties belonging to 3 of the most offending landlords in Thetford. There are 77 properties belonging to these 3 landlords. Dealing with the extent of hazardous conditions and non-compliance found in these houses requires intensive, carefully managed work. The team are working hard towards improving conditions, requiring licensing and taking enforcement action where there has been criminal activity. In total, across these 3 landlords, we have served 58 notices and penalties totaling £230,000 have been issued for non-compliances. Another sector is rough sleeper work. Over the last 12 months, the Rough Sleepers Support and Resettlement Team has worked tirelessly to support and reduce the number of individuals who are experiencing street homelessness. Through proactive outreach and strong multi-agency collaboration, the team has successfully supported some of our rough sleepers into safe and sustainable accommodation. This is thanks to the team's persistent outreach, tailored support and close collaboration with partners and other external agencies. These tenancies represent more than just a roof over someone's head. They mark a turning point in people's lives, offering stability, dignity and the foundation to rebuild. We have clients who are just starting their tenancies, as well as those who have maintained their tenancies beyond the 6-month mark, with some engaging in volunteering, training or employment, demonstrating the long-term impact of the team's work. The team's person-centred approach has been instrumental in these outcomes, addressing barriers such as lack of ID, rent arrears and debt management, complex health and mental health needs, welfare benefits assistance and attending medical appointments. The team have sourced and attended viewings with clients and physically moved clients and belongings when moving in. The team will also carry out initial tenancy visits, setting up bills including gas, electric, water and council tax, setting up direct debits and standing orders and registering with GPs where needed. The Rough Sleeper Support and Resettlement Team empower our clients to take those initial steps towards independence. Ongoing tenancy, sustainment support, including our regular check-ins, budgeting advice and links to community services, has helped prevent repeat homelessness and fostered resilience. These achievements reflect not only the dedication of the team, but also the strength of local partnerships and the effectiveness of early intervention strategies. The growing number of successful move-ons into safe, secure and sustainable housing is a testament to what can be accomplished when compassion, persistence and practical support come together. If you recall, a few months ago at General Purposes, we presented the Housing and Communities Transformation. This transformation programme has brought these 2 services together to work more closely to provide a service focused on early intervention and prevention. This will ensure we continue to support the most vulnerable in the district, but with one eye on the housing situation, supporting them before they reach crisis. This new way of working supports our residents with the wider determinants of health and in turn decreases homelessness presentations, lowers reliance on temporary accommodation and ensures vulnerable residents are properly housed. This new approach has seen an increase in the percentage of cases we successfully support through securing suitable accommodation at the prevention stage, for example, before the household becomes homeless, from 41.5% at March 24 to 51.5% at March 25, which is above the national average. Whilst there is still more work to do to increase this figure further, this is a great improvement and shows that the focus on prevention is reducing the numbers that go on to end up homeless. The transformation work has also been focused on reducing the numbers that end up in temporary accommodation, providing a better standard of temporary accommodation and moving those in TA into a more suitable, longer-term accommodation as quickly as possible. This targeted work has seen a reduction in the numbers in temporary accommodation from 150 to 82, and the numbers in nightly paid accommodation from over 70 to 20. This has been since the 1st of January 2025. Our focus remains to remove the need for nightly paid. This work is on track to reduce our nightly paid costs by £1 million this year. With regards to the LAF project, the Council secured funding through the Local Authority Housing Fund Round 2. This funding has allowed the Council to secure 11 properties for use as temporary accommodation and to house 2 families through the Afghan resettlement scheme. The project initially planned to purchase 10 properties through the LAF funding, but careful planning and procurement has allowed an additional property to be bought, with some remaining contingency. This acquisition has been instrumental in the reduction of our number of households in nightly paid temporary accommodation. With regards to disabled facilities grants, in the last 12 months, we have spent £1,645,094.03 on 149 cases, which is an average of just over £11,000 on each grant. However, 8 of these projects cost over £30,000 each. They're extensions for disabled adults with very complex needs. We have worked closely with Flagship and have achieved contributions from them of over £100,000 towards these. We have spent all their available capital works money for this year, and we will have to wait until the next financial year to continue to fund high-cost extensions with them in this way. In the first quarter of this financial year, we have already helped 6 children, 30 working age adults and 18 pensioners with adaptations. 30 of these are homeowners, 20 live in housing association properties and 4 in private rented properties. We have provided 3 ramps, 2 stair lifts to terminally ill clients to remain at home for as long as possible. The average time for achieving these is within a week. The quickest was a ramp from inquiry to installation in just 3 days. This area of work continues to be challenging due to the insufficient funding for the needs of our customers, which means we are still planning in works for clients with non-urgent needs back to April 24. We hope to be able to catch up with more of these over the next year. The challenge of managing the budget is never knowing what urgent cases will come in or whether it will be for a stair lift or an extension, for example. The Healthy Homes project. So over the last year, we were able to participate in a pilot project funded by MHCLG to increase awareness of and enforcement activity relating to damp and mould hazards in the private rented sector. We were awarded £130,000. The project concluded at the end of March and included upskilling the team and the surveying methods and remedial work required, equipment, paying for 2 officers to obtain qualifications, increased officer time to investigate reports of damp and mould, and landlord forum and training courses. This year we were successful in obtaining a further £30,000 to continue with this work. The funding will be used to increase the time to investigate reports of damp and mould and continue to support the landlord forum and provide training courses. With regards to domestic abuse, this is on the rise both nationally and locally. The housing team and the council as a whole has been working tirelessly to offer support and assistance to our most vulnerable residents. We are proud to report that since 2024, Breckland Council has been using 3 dedicated flats in the district to offer safe, emergency, temporary accommodation for families fleeing the risk of domestic abuse. We have partnered with Leeway, Norfolk's largest domestic abuse charity, to ensure that residents receive bespoke support, safety planning, and space to heal and recover during their stay. Domestic abuse is a complex issue that can affect anyone, regardless of gender, sexuality, class, or belief. It can take many forms, and the risk may change rapidly. We acknowledge the importance of continued professional development and increased awareness of domestic abuse across the board. As a result, all our housing solution officers have received domestic abuse awareness training and are trained in using DASH risk assessments. As a team, we strive to deliver the best service to people who are not safe to stay in their homes. Currently, we are going through the process of obtaining the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance accreditation, awarded to local authorities and housing providers able to demonstrate an exemplary response to domestic abuse. The Sanctuary scheme has been running for 2 years in Breckland. It is a victim-centred programme that can prevent homelessness by allowing victim survivors of domestic abuse to be and feel safer in their homes so they can remain there. Most clients are referred to us by partner organisations for the team to carry out a security survey on their homes and then provide targeted hardening for the premises for the victims at medium or standard risk. The work is sometimes funded by social landlords. Most of the time, the survey identifies what security items will help them be and feel safer in their own homes. The most commonly fitted items are video doorbells with security chains on front doors, extra security on ground floor windows and doors, as well as back gates. The work is a great example of the team supporting the most vulnerable to remain safely in their own homes. With regards to the preparation for the Renters' Rights Bill, soon to be an Act, looking ahead, the team have been engaging again with MHCLG in preparation for the Act. The bill is expected to get royal assent in May this year, with the majority of duties to commence in the following few months. The bill places a substantial increase in statutory enforcement duties on authorities. It is expected that the national guidance, as well as policies and procedures, will be available. The team will need extensive training in the new duties. We have been told to expect to double the team size in order to deliver on the new duties. We will receive new burdens funding for training and resource, but MHCLG have advised us that we are unlikely to know the figure until after the royal assent. It is estimated that 4,000 additional officers will be required nationally, and there is already a national skill shortage. Recruitment is already a challenge. Therefore, we have already taken steps to address this by growing our own, which includes qualifications for 4 existing officers to ensure they have the necessary skills, 2 apprentices, 1 has finished the 4-year degree and another will finish next year, and employing 2 graduate trainees who started this month. Increasing the supply and diversity of affordable housing, the Housing Service has supported planning and strategic housing in its priority. Last year, out of the 296 new affordable home completions, 166 were affordable rents and 130 affordable home ownership. Following the adoption of the Breckland Housing Strategy in September 24, the Council has made strong progress in delivering against its strategic housing objective. Key actions include establishment of a strategic housing board, initiations of strategic level engagement with registered providers, delivery of an agents forum to communicate local housing needs with the next meeting planned for the 16th of September, hosting of developer breakfast meetings with senior leadership, issuing of strategic housing mix and HEDNA guidance to pre-applications and planning applications supported by direct engagement with the strategic housing team, active promotion of social rent tenure in discussions with RPs and developers, co-hosting of a development forum with Kings Lynn and West Norfolk for RPs, co-hosting of a local government reorganisation housing development workshop with Kings Lynn West Norfolk for RPs and developers, and proactive engagement with new registered providers not previously operating within Breckland. This strategic approach is yielding positive results across the district. 4 major developers have now incorporated 1-bedroom housing types into their schemes, with more expected. Sites are coming forward with M4 accessible standards applied across all dwellings. M4 wheelchair accessible homes are being proposed at pre-application stage. Increased proposals for social rent tenures, including market to affordable conversions. A new supported living scheme for vulnerable adults is now under construction in Swaffham. Improved cross-sector collaboration with agents, developers, and both not-for-profit and for-profit RPs. And a new registered provider is now active in Breckland, with another preparing to enter the area. Internally, the council continues to foster strong working relationships across departments. Housing, strategic housing, development management and plan and policy teams are meeting regularly to ensure alignment and drive forward shared priorities. The revised National Planning Policy Framework, issued in December 24, significantly increased Breckland's housing delivery target from 625 to 903 dwellings per annum. The Breckland Housing Strategy and associated delivery plan will play a crucial role in ensuring that future growth delivers the right types, tenures, and standards of housing for our communities. It is crucial that we continue to work closely with our RP partners across all areas of our housing-related work, and I know that officers enjoy a really good and beneficial working relationship to enable this. I am pleased, therefore, that we are able to welcome some of our key partners, Broadland Housing Association, Victory Homes and Samphire Homes, here to the Commission today, and I look forward to them sharing with us their successes, their current work, and possibly also some of their challenges. We will all appreciate that their services are valuable to our residents and communities, but also that the work can be difficult and frustrating. So I thank them for this today, and also thank them for the time that they've taken out to be with us today. And I also thank you all for bearing with me and listening to all of that. But we are all here and happy to take questions and comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Suckett. Thank you very much, Sarah. I think what you've said today in that sort of whistle-stop tour just shows the breadth of responsibilities in housing, and just shows why we just need, you know, a mere 2 hours today to go through housing, and we probably won't have, you know, touched the sides in some respects. So there's a lot of ground that you've covered. I think a few questions. I'm going to turn to, though he hasn't got his hand up, Councillor Eagle, see if you've got any questions first, because I know that he has some very pressing issues later. Do you want to go first, Fabian? Okay. Question from members first. Councillor Linda Turner and then Robin Hunter-Clark. Linda.
Thank you, Chairman. Sarah, can I just talk to you about the empty home strategy, which I'm sure comes under housing? There seems to be some frustration amongst members of how long it takes for an empty home that's reported in to be gone through all the legal procedures, which we understand can be long and complicated. But it's frustrating when we know of so many families that could do with a home, or single people, older people, and yet there's properties still sitting there empty. Could you just comment on that for us, please?
Thank you, Councillor Turner. I do appreciate it is frustrating, and I know I get sick of saying this myself, so I appreciate that it's difficult to keep hearing it. It's a bit like the planning enforcement. It's a difficult process, but it is a process that we do have to follow. And when you start to get into people's homes, home ownership, legal entities, it is something which we have to follow a process. It's not always ours. But you will be pleased to know we are looking at how we can bring that empty homes policy forward, or adapt the empty homes policy that we have got and bring it forward to members. We're figuring out a way in which the best way is that we can do that, where we can, there'll be different strands to how we can look at this. At the moment, we're doing some work with ARP, Anglia Revenues Partnership. They are looking across all of the different local authorities that they work with, how they can bring some of the long-term empty homes back into use. These are homes that have been empty for a considerable number of years. So that is something where they're picking a property in each of the districts that want to work with them to see how we can bring that forward. because it's complex and because it's challenging, there's no point in setting the bar saying we're going to eradicate them all, because that's just sort of setting us all up to fail. But doing one in each authority, it helps them and us to understand better what that process is, what those challenges could be, whether it works, whether it's worth spending that time and effort into doing that, and how we can best do that. So any thoughts and comments what people have regarding, you know, the empty homes, where you see them, you know, still keep feeding that in, but we will be bringing something to members hopefully shortly, because it is something which is in that housing strategy that we are looking to box off against that delivery plan. But thank you for raising it.
Thank you, Linda. Useful question, because I'm sure, like other members, you know, I've been contacting people say what's happening with that property. You know, it's been empty or it's getting vandalised, etc. So that would be yet another thing for us to follow up. Thank you. Councillor Robin Hunter-Clark. Thank you, Robin.
Well, thank you, Chairman. It's good to be back after the summer recess, and thank you, Sarah, for your update. I'm a little bit disappointed that the update wasn't circulated in advance of the meeting. It just gives us a little bit more time to prepare rather than listening to a 20-minute script, but there we are. 2 or 3 questions, if I may, for you, Sarah. Local residents' needs is what I'm focusing on. What percentage of housing allocations go to local people on the waiting list compared with those rehoused via government schemes? How is the council balancing the obligations between local residents' needs and resettlement schemes? And what is the average waiting time currently for a Breckland resident on the housing register? I'd appreciate a response to those. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know some of the details to some of those questions, so I don't know whether Jill, Sarah, which one? Yeah, I'll pass that to Jill. Thank you.
I was so busy writing down the first one, I missed the second and the third, I'm afraid. So the first one was, what percentage of housing goes to local versus government schemes? Well, 100% of properties that go through us go to people through our housing register. Not everybody on our housing register is local to Breckland, but they have a local connection, which could be through family or working. What was the second question?
Balance of... Oh, that was the third.
No, sorry, what was the second question? Sorry.
Well, it was, how is the council balancing local housing demand with obligations under national resettlement schemes? And then really the crucial one is, what is the average waiting time for a Breckland resident on the housing register?
So the balance between the different schemes, the schemes to house people through the government schemes have been through the LAF, the Local Authority Housing Fund. So that's been additional funding to buy properties, and that has been for Ukrainian and Afghan families. That is the only national scheme that we are involved with. So everything else through our housing register or the social housing goes, as I said earlier, to the people on our housing register. The waiting time is, it's a kind of a how long is a piece of string question. So it will vary depending on, there are some people who never get housed on our housing register. So if I gave you an average, that would only be of those who are housed. I'll come back to you with an average later, but it will depend greatly on whether they are looking for a single house or 2-bed, a 3-bed, a 4-bed, and also it is entirely up to the customer what they apply for. So some customers don't apply for anything, or they'll only apply for 1 or 2 properties. So it depends entirely on their situations. Okay.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Councillor Hunter-Clark. Before we turn up to Councillor Taylor, so it'd probably be helpful, Sarah, picking up Councillor Hunter-Clark's points, one might should make as well, the lot of areas that you've covered, and there will be some things that people want to take up anyway, individually or collectively through the commission, you know, after the meeting as well, things that may escape people. So it might be handy if that's, maybe if that's reformulated or rebadged, and then we can send that out to commission members. So a lot of information, they're very valuable, but we don't want it to get lost in the ether either. Thank you. Councillor.
I mean, it is usual for a report to be made in writing, isn't it, rather than just a verbal update, because it just doesn't give members enough time to consider what they may want to ask about, and to come back on things. You know, I just don't think that's the way we should be operating.
It is usual, Councillor Hunter Clark, and as you all know, since I took over the chair of this, and making sure that we have any actual presentations are received well beforehand, so people can digest them and look at them and formulate questions. So sometimes these things happen, but your point is noted. Thank you, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. My question is around subletting, really. I know of cases that have been reported to our housing team of subletting in the district. How do we ensure that the organisations that we work with, and particularly I know of a couple with Samphire Homes that have been reported a year ago, months ago, some even longer, and those properties are still being subletted. How do we manage that, and how do we make sure that those organisations are getting those houses freed up for people on our waiting list? And I literally am amazed how well the team have done bringing down our numbers on our list, and that's phenomenal and really good. But we have people waiting, and we have homes that are being subletted that could take those numbers down more. I just want to know how we ensure those organisations we work with tackle that problem.
So normally people contact me and then I pass it on to the relevant housing association, and then I follow up if I haven't heard anything, or we do communicate quite regularly on these things. I think Helen will probably speak to you afterwards about the two properties, if that's okay, that you from Samphire. Okay, so I do regularly get contacted by members about issues with properties, and then I liaise with the colleagues across those housing associations.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Before I turn to Councillor Atterwell, who's got his next hand up, we have in the past circulated details of a spreadsheet of the ownership of all social housing properties throughout the district, and that's also done through after a task and finish group, which Councillor Linda Turner was involved with. If any member hasn't had that already, because this will enable members, if you're walking down the street, you see scaffolding up what's going on here, you'll be able to see which provider it is, but also not necessarily the length of tenure, but the type of tenure, because then you can see what's going on there, and you may get sort of first hint, sometimes even before officers, what's going on. So I'll make sure that's sort of available again. It is unfortunately a spreadsheet for the whole of the district, so you're going to have to sort of filter down through it. But there's lots of information, lots of tools out there, as I said, but it's actually seeing the wood for the trees, you know, which is also going back to the point which Councillor Hunter Clark made in terms of the volume of information that we're getting. Councillor Atterwell, Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Sarah, for that comprehensive report. Could I invite you to circulate that to members afterwards, please? Because I think that'd be very useful. And obviously, if we've got any follow-up questions from that, we could submit that to you in writing, and obviously copy in the chair. I just want one observation from me. I deal with an awful lot of housing cases myself, and I just want to pay tribute to the team. Because the professionalism that they show, the dedication, and I have to say the care that they show to the residents it certainly struck me the more I've got into doing more housing related work. It's a complex field. I've learned that in order some residents, it might take many months, if not years, because of their complex needs and challenges and finding the right properties. The overall problem that we have as a district and across the country is we simply don't have enough houses. So my plea would be to any councillors who think that we need to do the typical NIMBY thing because it's easy and say that we don't need to build houses and we don't want them in our backyard. Every time we do that, we're making that a problem for the housing team, because we do need more housing stock. We need modern housing stock, and that will take the pressure off the team. So I just want to make that point. You made two points, Jill, I'm sorry, Sarah, regarding the houses in Thetford and the 3 landlords. can I just confirm that we're completely covering all our costs with that? And have we got separate, have we had to take on separate dedicated officers or external help with that? Or is that really a drain on our resources that could be better used on more pressing cases, you know, to help housing cases across the district? I mean, what is the nub of this? Will we ever get a resolution where these three landlords are finally putting the money into the properties, making damn sure that they're done properly? Or if they don't, what ultimately can we do to address that? Because that can't be allowed to go on forever. And the second question I had was regarding disabled facility grants. I just wanted to check, Sarah, because you said that the money allocated for this year had already been spent, but I think I'm right in saying that you always keep some in reserve for the emergency cases. Could you just confirm how much is still in reserve for those emergency cases, please? Thank you.
I'll do some of that and then I'll pass it on to Jill. So with regards to the landlords, I'll let Jill answer the technical stuff around the covering our costs and stuff, but the fines that we receive from that goes back into that service to be able to help us to continue to do that. And I think one of the most important things for me anyway, is it's the example that we're setting by going after those people, you know, and they are the worst of the landlords that we've got, and it is tricky, it is difficult, it is resource intense, it does take a huge amount of time, effort and patience from the team to be able to deal with people. But it's also not right and okay that we've got residents in Breckland living in that type of accommodation. So I think the example that we set when we do go after those types of landlords helps us to just make sure other people know that actually they're not going to be able to come to Breckland and get away with not investing in their own properties and just thinking that they can have anyone go in there and live in those sorts of conditions. If we wouldn't expect to live in those conditions ourselves, we shouldn't be expecting our residents to live in those, and it's the right and proper thing to do to go over those to go after those landlords. So I think there's a bit of a thing there where it's tricky because can you always quantify what it is that you get in return for that? But I think just setting that standard, setting that bar for others and showing a bit of an example to some of those people will in the long term help us. But I will let Jill just answer, sorry Jill, the detail around the technical stuff.
So we employed 2 new members of staff to take on this project work, and then the fines that we're charging cover their salaries. So that's covered. The 3 landlords, it's been quite an interesting project because they've all responded in a different way. So one of them has really upped their game and has started doing a lot of work to the properties that's needed. One of them has refused to do the work, so we have gone through the courts with them and we've actually done the work to some of the properties ourselves. We then put a charge against the properties as well as issuing fines, so that money then comes back to us. And then the third one is selling a lot of their properties in order to pay us the fines, but also to come out of the market because they've realised, we've helped them realise it's not the right area of work for them. So it's been quite an interesting project, but there's still many more of their properties for us to work through. And because we end up in court, we have to make sure we do it absolutely thoroughly and don't miss anything out. The DFGs, when Sarah said that we'd spent the budget, that's Flagship's budget for the extra costs. We haven't spent our budget yet. We do portion it out, so quarterly we have enough to deal with all of the urgent cases that come in. And then at the end of each quarter, we look at some of those that are non-urgent. They still have a great need, but have been waiting longer, and we'll do some of those. So we spread it out across the year to make sure we can always cover that. Okay.
Do you want to follow up on that, Councillor Atterbury?
I have an additional question, if I may, Chair.
As you're on a roll, go on, Roger.
Thank you. So thank you for that answer. I appreciate that. You alluded earlier on to the LAF scheme in terms of the resettlement for Ukrainian and Afghan families. Could you just tell us how many houses housing those families that we have within the district? You did, I think, correctly say that all of the money was not money that's paid for by the council, that is money that's funded by central government for that scheme, for that specific purpose. So that's the council's not losing out by having to house those people. But could you, I'm guessing that the percentage of those houses in terms of the whole private and social rented sector that we have in Breckland is an incredibly small percentage. I'd be amazed if that was anywhere near 1%, but can you give us a sense on that and how many houses we're actually talking about to give it some more context? Thank you.
It's 13 for Ukrainian families and 4 for Afghan families, and they were all bought on the private market.
Is that it for now, Roger? Thank you. Yeah, just my own little question following up on the DFGs, they were visited grants. In terms of the capital, etc., am I right in thinking that the position is the same, that comes down to us? It's not from our own initial resources as it was, though we've sometimes have topped that up in the past. This has all come down from central government, county, etc., down to us. That's still the same position. I thought it was. Thank you. We'll go Councillor Bambridge, then we'll back to you then, Roger, unless anyone else has their hand up. Councillor Bambridge.
Yes,
I'm very, very happy to ensure that does happen. We believe in complete transparency here and accountability at this meeting. I'm actually taking further steps in, say, for example, in housing, which I'll announce at the end of the meeting, which I forgot to say in my preamble, which be offline. But certainly all that information should be available for members, including anything where we've had late presentations or briefings, so that all councillors are on the same page. Obviously, I have to have regard for commission members in terms of taking a lead in the work programme, and questions are asked, but all councillors are affected by housing issues one way or another, whether it's developments or vacant houses, etc., and the cost of the exchequer. So I hope that assures you, Councillor Bambridge. Thank you. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I take this opportunity just to ask a question of the team? Much was made in the press a few weeks ago regarding the hotel in Dereham and emergency accommodation. And I think I'm right in saying that part of the problem there was a communication problem amongst the various councils within Norfolk in terms of who they're trying to house. Some of that could be at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. I'm just wondering if you could inform the Commission of any improvements that's been made to the communication regarding emergency accommodation amongst all the district councils in Norfolk, to improve that communication, just to make sure that we are, I suppose dispersing isn't the right word, but I can't think of anything else at the moment, to make sure that we've got a more even spread of where people require an emergency accommodation, that whether they may have mental health illness, whether that's domestic abuse, that type of thing, that we are trying to not concentrate them all in probably one area, or there may be that some of those people don't need to be in housing that's in close proximity to the other set, if that makes sense. I think that's just a communication problem that I think was caused there. I'd like to think that there's been some improvement in that communication. Perhaps you could just tell us a little bit more about how that works, please. Thank you.
So you're right that councils
relatively routinely have a need to place people outside of their own district for some of the reasons which Jill alluded to before, and sometimes that can be because they're at risk because of their surroundings. And sometimes it's just there is nothing available at the 5 o'clock on a Friday night when sometimes these things happen. So we accept that that happens. There is a requirement for a council who is placing somebody outside of their districts to let the receiving authority know, and that should be happening, albeit there are occasions where it doesn't happen. What's important to remember is that when a council places somebody into another district, they don't discharge their own duty to be responsible and to look after that person. You don't transfer the responsibility of the person. That remains with the local authority who places them. But clearly, we recognise that the situation in Dereham had caused a lot of interest, and it was important that we tried to avoid a situation like that happening again. So I have met with each of the directors responsible for housing across the county, met with them after the incident, and we all discussed and recognised the duty we have to let each other know. So that will be cascaded down to teams. There was also a discussion about how we place people in a more informed way. So what we are looking to produce is a central place whereby if we are placing somebody in another district, we can record where that is, that's visible to all the councils, because as I pointed out, that for all the right reasons, on any given day, colleagues in Broadland might place 3 people in Dereham, and blindly colleagues in Yarmouth might place 4 people, and before we know it, we've got an influx of people being placed into one location. So that's being worked on, about how we can have visibility on who's being placed where, so we can make more informed decisions if and when we need to place people outside of our district.
Thank you for that reply, Steve. Obviously, as one of the Dereham members, I appreciate the importance of what you're saying there. I'll take Councillor Turner next again, while anyone else can think about a question. We can't have this just being the Roger and Linda show, and Robin, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. On behalf of many of the backbenchers and elected members here, I just want to record for the minutes our grateful thanks to the whole team and every part of your team. I think the majority of my work is to deal with housing, supporting families who are desperate for housing. I'm delighted that the housing in Shipton has started building, so we've got 102 shared or for rent houses coming on stream, which will make a big difference. As an elected member, I've always been treated with absolute courtesy from your team, Jill, and support. I've had to fight my case sometimes, but that's because I work on behalf of the residents, and there's always, I can honestly say, hand on heart, been 100% outcome. So please, Ruth, record the members' thanks to the whole team. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We'll make sure that's done. Any questions from members present or non-members before we move on further? And I hope, obviously, that your team has sort of captured that. And obviously, needless to say that I think probably the particular questions, it's also helpful probably if people have got questions on not just the presentations that we're going to have, but also the questions that are asked, that we can then have all those perhaps going through Ruth here for Democratic Services, then we can keep track of who's asking what, and then circulate all those answers round to all members. Everyone's all on the same page. So thank you for that, Linda. Thank you very much for that presentation. I'm sure, obviously, we look forward, you'll be getting a lot more questions, I'm sure, after the meeting in the future days, but thank you for that comprehensive session, and obviously very much hope you'll stay for the rest of the meeting, Sarah and your teams. I'm sure they'll be relevant. Thank you very much. We're now pleased to announce we've got the visit of some of our housing providers today from both Flagship and Broadland. We're going to have both of them have sent their slides out covering some different aspects, some of those which members have asked some more detail beforehand. We hope that's helpful. We're going to have Flagship first of all, which is Helen Marjoram and Charlie Corley. And then after that, we'll be having Broadland with Justin and O'Connor and Stephanie Davis. But perhaps if you'd like to kick off, Charlie and Ellen, talk about your slides, the challenges, opportunities. I'm sure there are lots. You've only covered, obviously, I think not every single area, but that would help if you could start off, and we'll see where the questions go. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, so I'll start off by talking about the asset management aspects of the questions we were asked to talk about, and then I'll hand over to Helen for the housing related stuff. The presentation relates to the asset management section, just for reference. So yeah, just what I'm going to cover today is a bit about our planned works, covering questions that was asked around stock condition and decent homes standard and our compliance with that, how we are progressing with planned programs within our properties, and how much of that is reactive versus how much is actually planned. And then I've also got some detail of some damp and mould actions that we've taken in response to recent changes in legislation, but ahead of that as well, in order to react to the obviously pressing demand around that very important issue. So firstly, on stock condition of decent homes. So essentially we assess our stock condition primarily through stock condition surveys. Our coverage of surveys, which is the main metric, is whether they're done within the last 5 years. Overall, Flagship, across the entire of our stock, we've got 75% that's been surveyed within the last 5 years. Breckland is actually slightly higher than that, with 77% that's been surveyed within the last 5 years. We are very, very keen to increase that coverage and get above 95%. We would love to get to 100%. 100% is always going to be a real challenge, primarily due to access. And access is actually the reason why we're not higher than 75 or 77% at the moment. All of our surveys are completed using in-house surveyors. We've got a team of 10 surveyors. We have used external providers in the past, but we find we get much more detail and a better service. And also customers get a better service if they've got a Flagship employee in the home who can answer other queries and refer things like repairs on far more effectively than if we're using an external. So when we do the survey, there's 3 aspects to the survey. One is the stock condition, which focuses on the age of components and the condition of components primarily, so your kitchens, bathrooms, roofs, etc. They do an HHSRS assessment, which is the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, which is a prescribed survey looking for hazards within the homes. And they also capture energy performance data in order to make sure that we're moving towards our challenge of getting all of our homes above an EPC C rating by 2030. So our decent homes reporting, our reporting period basically is at the end of March each year. That goes to the regulator of social housing in our regulatory return. This year, our year-end position was 98.6% compliant across the entirety of the stock. And in Breckland, we were 98.8% compliant. Specifically within Breckland, those were 15 Category A HHSRS issues, and they were issues which were live at the time of reporting. They have all been resolved now. We constantly have if you want to use a repairs terminology, a work in progress, a WIP of HHSRS issues as we're identifying them and resolving them. They are reported to board monthly. Our progress on that and the age of those is reported to board. So those are things we take very seriously. We do tend to be quite cautious. It's a prescribed survey, but it is down to the interpretation of the surveyors themselves. They assess the situation in the property and the occupants, and a risk rating is created on that. We will always over-report, if anything, because we'd rather be cautious. So those 15 I can give the detail separately if it's helpful, but the majority of those tend to be where we find there's an alarm missing in a property, which the absence of an alarm constitutes a severe hazard. The challenge around that is often follow-up access to put the new alarm in. That's what means that sometimes they sort of stick around a little while. And the majority of those failures would indeed be related to alarms. The other issues at year end were 52 category D thermal comfort issues. Thermal comfort, without going into the minute detail of decent homes, essentially relates to whether there's an effective heating system in there and effective insulation, and a combination of those two things depending on the heating type. We had 52 issues where we couldn't prove compliance, and I make that distinction because subsequently where we've gone back to check that, we've found that that has been an issue with our data rather than an absence of insulation in those properties. Where there is an absence of insulation, and that's often because it's been disturbed due to works or something like that within the loft, we will address all of those within this financial year. So yeah, the progress against decent homes is very good. Next slide, please. What feeds that essentially is our capital investment programs, replacing the components. This data was the first quarter's performance across the entirety of flagship. I don't have a breakdown for Breckland. We don't report in that way. We tend to be driven by the individual property data rather than subsets of local authorities or local super output areas or anything like that. We are driven by the data that comes from the stock condition surveys, that comes from referrals from the repairs team about when we do our replacements. But the Breckland stock as it is, which is nearly 7,000 of the 32,000 flagship homes, will be representative of this, this picture. So essentially we're slightly ahead of programme. I won't go through all of it line by line, but we're ahead of programme for most things until you get to the final three, which is air source heat pumps, solar panels and storage heaters. And those are all relating to our Warmer Homes Fund renewables programme, which is the government grant that we get to increase the energy efficiency and reduce carbon emissions. The reason that we're behind on those is that the announcement of the funding, which we were pleased to be successful in achieving, was only made in March. And also there's a very heavy level of administrative requirements in terms of processing those works and validating those works have been carried out in an effective way. So that means that those, there's a lot of prep work that goes into those. So we've had a slow start delivering those, but we will catch up by the end of the year. Next slide. I was asked to talk about how many we react to in terms of components. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. We will always have things that come along that surprises, if you like, that weren't planned works. You would always aim to have that somewhere between 10 and 20% is the ideal, so that you're not doing too many things that you hadn't planned to do. Kitchens, bathrooms around where we would expect. Doors and windows are higher than we would like, and I think what we're finding is we assume a 30-year life cycle for our doors and windows. We are finding that doors and windows that were put in about 27, 28 years ago aren't lasting 30 years, and so we are investigating the impact of revising our life cycle assumptions on that, which would mean that our business planning allows to replace them earlier. But essentially all of these come via a repair service. So someone will phone in and say there's been an issue with their component. Repair will be attempted, and if it can't be attempted, it will be referred to one of the surveyors in my team who assess whether a replacement is required. And that's what it results in this reactive work. The key difference at the bottom there is on heating systems. That's primarily higher around gas boilers because we replace those when they become beyond economic repair. That's a relatively new change, and we have had a planned programme, but what we were finding is actually it's more effective to try and repair them, and if they can't, have the capacity to just do a boiler swap rather than attempt two repairs, perhaps where we try to get parts, which can delay things, and then find that it's beyond economic repair anyway and we have to do it. So essentially what we're saying is if we go in and we can't repair it at the first visit, then we book in the boiler swap. And actually, conversely, that means that it gets resolved quicker than if we attempted to repair it or if we just had only planned works going on. Next slide, please. Yeah, finally, I was asked to talk about actions we've taken to address damp and mould. So obviously this has been a real shift since the tragic case in Rochdale. I think the whole sector has moved to react to that. We have incredibly lots of resources been targeted towards this. Starting at the front end, we've got all our call handlers are trained to assess damp and mould cases. They can use video technology to assist them with that. At that point, it will either go to a specialist surveyor, or more likely to dedicated operatives that we've got who are trained to deal with mould issues. That's all they do. They don't do other repairs. We've got a team of operatives who immediately react to the damp and mould cases. They will do a wash and they'll do an assessment, and if they can't deal with that situation themselves, that's when it goes to one of the specialist surveyors. As I say, we've got 12 of those, and they will diagnose the issue, and that's where it's a fundamental problem with the property, essentially. And we've got specialist contractors who have been procured, again, specifically to deal with damp and mould cases. If we can't do it in-house, then we've got those on call. And also, just to make sure we've got a more joined-up approach with housing colleagues, we've got a new system which kind of allows for case handling across housing and property issues, so that we can cross-reference any issues from a property side or from a housing point of view that might be affecting the property, exacerbating the damp and mould issue if we've got hoarding or overcrowding in there. So that's it from me. I'll hand over to Helen for the housing aspect.
Hopefully the mic's still working. Thank you. Apologies, this wasn't sent in advance. I've stepped in at last minute due to absence, so I will do my best to cover and we'll make sure in future that you've got something in advance. So one of the first things we were asked to share was around empty homes. So currently we have 65 across the whole of our stock. As Charlie's mentioned, we've got around 7,000 homes within the Breckland area. Our longest term voids at the moment are under insurance works and are down to fires largely, and that can be different through time. We might have flooding or different bits and pieces like that that go to insurers, and they're typically what takes us quite a bit longer. It might be a full rebuild. That leaves then 58 other homes that are sat empty. So of those, just to give a bit of context, we've got 6 that are in supported or housing with care, which are allocated via Norfolk County. And we do on occasion have issues with those where it's housing with care, but we're working closely with Norfolk County and also with Jill's team where appropriate to address those. We've got 5 within temporary accommodation, which we manage on behalf of Breckland, but working closely alongside colleagues within Breckland, and we've got a bit of a plan in place to address those. They're not long term, just to highlight that, which then leaves 41 in the rest of our accommodation. So our relet times at the moment in Breckland from April to date, and this is all our relets, so whether it's been major or minor works, are averaging around just early 50 days. Last year that was more like 45 days, and that isn't probably quite where we'd want it to be. We'd want it to be much quicker than that. We're doing a piece of work alongside our repairs colleagues to target around 14 days for minor works and 28 for major works. So as you've heard, some of the long-term issues are largely around insurance. We have more recently had some issues with our asbestos contractor, but we've made some changes to that and brought in at least 2 new contractors, so we don't put all our eggs in one basket, and that doesn't happen again in future. So that's around empty homes. The next area I was asked to cover was around complaints and timescales. So as a housing provider, we need to meet the timescales of the Housing Ombudsman expect. So for us, that means at stage 1, we acknowledge them in 5 days and respond within 10. And then at stage 2, the same, acknowledge in 5 and respond within 20. And we're largely hitting those targets. So for Breckland, most recently it's been about 98.1% in terms of acknowledgement and 99% in terms of the 10 working days response. What I will say in terms of providing a response to our customers, that may not always be that they've had the final piece of work done. So if there's a repair outstanding, we'll agree what needs to be done to reach a resolution, and we'll continue to monitor that action. and that's in line with what the Housing Ombudsman would expect of us. So largely, and this is across the sector as well as within Flagship, our complaints do relate to repairs and time to complete the repair or the service time to receive a response. We have done lots of work over the last 12 months with our repairs colleagues. We're averaging around, for routine repairs, around 6 working days. But we know that there are more complex issues which are taking longer, and that's where we're perhaps getting more of the complaints come through, and working with those teams to address what are the issues, what's stopping us getting to those. So the number of complaints we get in terms of Breckland are average around 43 per month, and that's comparable to our other local authorities based on stock size. And the majority of the issues we do manage to resolve at stage 1. So that's complaints. The next section you'd asked around was arrears, evictions, arrears and antisocial behaviour. So looking at year to date for the financial year, in terms of evictions, we have had 10 in total, 8 of those for rent debt and 2 for tenancy breaches, which would include ASB. What I would say is evictions is our absolute last resort. We would work alongside our customers as much as possible to ensure there's payment plans in place if it's rent related, and in terms of tenancy breaches to understand what the issues are and perhaps reach some resolution. Rent debt for the end of August, we were at 3.65, which is down from 4.64 last year. And we're happy that where we're performing is relatively well. I haven't given a further comparison, but if people have got questions, then I can come back to you. And then a bit more detail around antisocial behaviour. So predominantly for us, that sits in Thetford, and then the next highest area would be Dereham, followed by Swaffham. Thetford and Dereham are not disproportionate to the amount of homes that we have in those areas. And Thetford numbers are consistent with what we've seen over time, and we're doing quite a lot of work at the moment, working closely with the police to address some issues we've got there. What I would say is in Swaffham, we're seeing a slightly disproportionate the amount of reports we're getting versus the homes. So we've got a target in that area, an action plan in place with our teams. I've got probably lots more detail to give you about antisocial behaviour, but just a quick overview is that demand has increased consistently. We get spikes in summer seasonal times, and most of our reported ASB in Breckland is actually the highest category is drugs, followed by noise. This year, though, we have seen an increase in personally targeted ASB involving intimidation and harassment. And then lastly on those points, the end-to-end times I was asked about. So for antisocial behaviour cases, it's around 60 to 70 days. But what I would say is we don't always see that as an accurate measure, because if we're needing to take something through the court system, then we'll be beholden by what that looks like. So moving on. The next section I was asked to talk about was adaptations in properties, and particularly around whether that's possible within new builds. I would say yes, it is possible. I think it would depend on how the new builds come to us. There's usually 2 options, and I'm sure you may know this, but if it's coming via Section 106 planning condition, where X number of homes are for social rent, then the developer may have already built the homes. We may not have as much say as we might like in what's required in those homes. But equally, the other option is that it might be land we've purchased ourselves and we do our own design and build setup. But I think we could perhaps work with the team at Breckland to understand specific cases or where we might need to do a bit more of that. And then there were 2 specific questions that came up. So firstly was around subletting, which I know Councillor Taylor has mentioned. So we class subletting as tenancy fraud, and although I would say our customers do have the permission to take in a lodger for a spare room, for example, but if it's a home that's completely sublet, then absolutely we should be investigating that. We'll often visit the home unannounced, speak to Breckland around who's registered for council tax, use open source data to investigate. I would say that often we may not go back to the person that has reported it, purely because there might be some information we cannot share, but absolutely I'll look at the cases that you've got and I'll come back to you with a response on those 2. And then the other question I had was around if a resident was to move into a care home on a permanent basis and had no family to empty the property, what's the process? Well, usually somebody in that situation would have an allocated social worker, so we would work alongside that person in terms of getting the property cleared. And there might be different options depending on individual circumstances, whether we arrange that or we work with them to identify how that's done and go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen. And before we move on to your other colleagues from Broadland, again, as we've said, as with Councillor Suggett's presentation, perhaps if we, in a suitable format, if you, what you've just presented can also be sent to our committee clerk so we can circulate that to members, because there's some of that, we appreciate you've stepped in the last minute, but some of that detail there is very useful and important. So thank you very much for that. Now going to turn to colleagues from Broadland. I think in no particular order, you can go whichever order you like in, is Justin O'Connor, Assistant Asset Director, and Stephanie Davis, Assistant Housing Director. I think I've got that right. So either of you can go first and the floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for the opportunity for allowing us to present to you this morning. My name is Justin, Assistant Asset Director, and my colleague Stephanie, Assistant Housing Director. So what does that mean? From my perspective, I am heavily focused on the investment and meeting the various regulatory requirements across the sector, and Stephanie is predominantly focused on housing management, such as tenant support, antisocial behaviour and lettings. In a similar format to Flagship's presentation, I will focus on the asset management side of things in the first instance, and then Stephanie will take you through some of the housing management slides. Next slide, please. So a quick overview in terms of Broadland Housing, established in 1963. We currently have approximately 5,500 homes within the Norfolk or North Suffolk areas, of which 598 homes within the Breckland area. We offer a various range of tenures, such as homelessness up to outright purchase, whereby in an outright sale scenario, those surpluses will be used to support additional affordable housing. Next slide, please. So the first slide focuses on decent home standards, and we measure it in terms of those homes that do not meet the standard. And on this slide, you can see less than 1%, I think it's 0.04%, and it relates to 2 homes. In both of these instances, these homes are very complicated scenarios whereby the homes are not let at the moment. One relates to a private landlord where we've got an ongoing legal challenge with that private landlord, and the other property relates to unauthorised alterations to the home that deemed the property unstructurally unsafe, and therefore we've had to provide temporary accommodation. But in both of these instances, these homes fall outside of the Breckland area. Next slide, please. So how do we monitor how we comply with decent homes? Predominantly on the components within the home based on age and life cycle. So looking at the condition of those components and of the age of those components to determine whether they are decent or not. We also have a stock condition programme whereby we use internal surveyors to carry out those surveys on a 5-year life cycle, of which we are slightly under the 100% mark, but we hope to be where we need to be this financial year at 100%. Similar to Flagship, the challenges as to why we're not 100% relate to access difficulties. We also use an external chartered surveyor company to carry out 5% of external validation surveys. So every year there's approximately 250 surveys that are completed by an external company as a assurance, effectively, as to what we say we are doing. Someone else is able to come in and validate that information and the data that we hold also against our homes. Just as an aside, we also have under 500 homes that fall below an energy performance certificate level of a C, which we expect to deliver by 2030. But having said that, we appreciate that there's a new minimum energy efficiency standard that's going through consultation at the moment, and we expect those energy efficiency metrics to change. Next slide. So this chart is just in relation to our spend over the last 4 years. As you can see, there has been an increase in expenditure, and our ratio between planned and responsive spend is currently at 53% in favour of planned. We would like to increase that, in all honesty, to 60%. But what we are seeing, to be fair, is a challenge in terms of all of the new regulation, and there's additional regulation that we do expect. I mentioned previously the minimum energy efficiency standards, but also in terms of the reforms to decent homes. It is having an impact in terms of spend that has to be prioritised for good reason in terms of improving standards across the sector. But to name but a few, building safety, fire safety regulations, AWIB's law, and energy efficiency targets, that has swallowed up some of our significant investment. And one of the areas that we have seen a shortfall investment is in terms of our cyclical decoration programs and external decoration program, which we hope to invest more in our homes over future years, but that's one area that has taken a hit. So we still have a budget for external decorations, but it's not as much as we would like after prioritising these other areas. So damp and mould, as we're aware, our law will come into effect on the 1st of October. I'm going to run some of few things on this slide that we have been doing. So we use our own internal rating system to monitor damp and mould. So Flagship mentioned previously the Housing Health and Safety rating system. So we have a rating system between 1 and 4. 1 is being similar, 1 and 2 being exactly the same as the Health and Safety rating system in terms of it's a serious concern or major impact of damp and mould. If it's a category 1, it's likely going to need for those tenants to decamp from the property to carry out essential works. We use all of our operatives to be able to monitor damp and mould within the homes, because we understand the most transactions we have as a business is from our repair service, and therefore for every repair operative that goes out to a home, automatically one of the mandatory functions of the app is to identify whether there is damp and mould within the home. So we use that for every repair that is carried out. We have a team of surveyors in-house also that if they're a category 1 and 2, it will be escalated to that team to deal with. But the majority cases that come through are category 3, which we classify as general repairs. So this will be isolated repairs, damp and mould repairs, ventilation repairs, which will go into the mix. Very few of them are category 1 and 2. As it currently stands, our data suspects that there's 5 properties that are category 2. This could be because of a major leak, or in one instance, as we're aware there, we found it really difficult to gain access, and when we gained access to the home, it was one of those homes that just emphasises the importance of carrying out 100% of your stock condition surveys. This home had significant challenges with damp and mould, and there were support services that were also required to manage this particular case. The final category that we have on a damp and mould is category 4, which is minor, and in these instances we will provide additional information to the residents in terms of how to minimise damp and mould, and then do a follow-up check 3 months later to determine if it's escalated to a category 3, in which case we would carry out repair works, or if the matter has been resolved. Next slide, please. So in addition, we have worked with external and internal tenant groups to provide information to our residents, because we understand that helping to inform our residents in how to tackle damp and mould is of key importance. But we also, as I mentioned previously, with the operatives going out and carrying out repairs and our surveying team, we appreciate that not everybody uses the internet to access information, and therefore we will have hard copy leaflets that we provide to our residents also. So in terms of adaptations, the minimum standards that we'll comply with is the building regulations, Part M. With the building regulations, we also try and have a consistent approach to not only our development programme, but our asset management and our responsive repair policies, in providing consistency in terms of some of the measures that we install. So a very basic example of that is installing lever taps as standard, or showers that comply with Part M, and also are installed at development stage, new build stage, but when we actually replace components within our homes. We have built fully adapted homes, and that requires an understanding with local authorities in determining what the demands are, and to understand that at the earliest opportunity to be delivered on site. So the next 2 slides relate to unavailable homes. So this is just a snapshot in terms of, we monitor on a monthly basis in terms of what homes in each tenure type are still not available. The vast majority of them are our general needs homes. Next slide, please. And this, again, this is just a breakdown in terms of how we monitor them, and obviously try to minimise and are scrutinised on a monthly basis in terms of the volumes of unavailable homes. And to summarise, next slide, please. We can see that the largest proportion of empty homes are those that are due to major repair. I think it's something that we probably need to look at internally, as to whether some of those repairs can be done in occupation. So we don't really want to be holding up relets for kitchen or bathroom refurbishments if it can be avoided, because we carry
Thanks, Justin. So I'm going to talk to you to start with about the average relet time for general needs homes, and I just want to be really clear that this does not include properties which Justin was referring to that are under major repairs. They're excluded for this purpose of reporting, and it doesn't include supported and older persons, so specialist housing. This is focused on general needs, which is where the majority come from the Breckland waiting list. And just to err on the side of caution, try not to compare us to Flagship, because we do not report in the same way. I think that Flagship mentioned that actually they're including their unavailable homes or major repairs. We are not. So the two will look very different. So just to heads that up. So this is showing our performance up to the end of July. And you can see there our target to turn around a property, and the average to turn around a property is 18 days. And I think it's fair to say that's a stretch target for us. That's quite ambitious, but we recognise that every day that a home is empty, someone needs to live in it and it's not available. So I think it's also fair to say that we're probably not going to meet that target this year. We're going to be slightly over, but that doesn't mean we're not going to change that ambition and remain there and try and stretch ourselves. We don't have any hard to let properties in Breckland. I wouldn't say we have any hard to let properties anywhere anymore. It's quite an old term now, but often we get asked, is there anything that you can't let? That's not an issue for us. In terms of the challenges, and there are some in getting homes ready for people to move into, some of those challenges are purely the amount of homes we might get back in a month. It could be the condition those homes come back to us in. It could be absence and sickness within the workforce, holidays, etc. We have our own voids team in house, and that can be impacted. So yeah, there's a number of things, but a key thing for us there is that we need to try and make sure homes are back ready for someone to move into as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. Income collection, I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but this is our performance again up until the end of July, of the percentage of rent that could be collected that we did collect. So just to say, at year end in March 2025, we collected 106% of rent. So we collected the rent that was available and then collected arrears as well. Our arrears at the end of March stood at 2.5%. We're happy with that position. And our performance, we're aiming to meet 100% again this year, and so far we think that we can do that. Yeah, so that's income collection. Next slide, please. So evictions, and to talk a bit about evictions. So we are a member of Homes for Cathy. So and one of our commitments under the Homes for Cathy group is that we will not evict anyone for rent arrears where they're seeking to resolve that issue. So if they're taking steps to prevent their homelessness, we will work with them. And that means that we will engage with them, we will provide support to them, and all we ask is that they engage with us and they do things to take steps to address those arrears and their current rent. And in terms of income, we will work to try and prevent an eviction. So an eviction is a last resort when it comes to rent arrears. We don't have the same flexibility with antisocial behaviour. If antisocial behaviour is getting to an eviction stage, that's usually because it's really serious and having an impact on the community. So it's dealt with slightly differently. But in terms of ASB, eviction is still the last resort. So for 24-25, we had 7 evictions for rent and arrears. We had 4 for antisocial behaviour. From 25 to date, we've had 4 for rent and arrears, and we've had 1 for ASB. None of those evictions over those 2-year period to date were in the Breckland area. In terms of antisocial behaviour, I think the low eviction speaks for itself. We monitor antisocial behaviour cases monthly. Our antisocial behaviour cases are proportionate to the number of homes we have in Breckland. And most common, I think in line with flagship, is drugs related and noise will be our most common complaints we get. Next slide, please. So I'm going to touch on our tenancy support team because we do have a strong tenancy support team in-house to support residents, just recognising that there are a lot of people in our communities who need support. So we will have that support in-house for those people who need it. So they can provide a whole range of things to help residents. So we automatically will refer any first-time tenant who comes and hasn't had a tenancy before, just because things like utilities and setting up, just something that we can give a bit extra support with and hopefully means they sustain their home. The outcome is to try and help people sustain their tenancy and to live safely. So they're the 2 main things that we focus on. They can help with maximising benefits, benefit appeals. They help with fuel poverty. They'll provide support where people might have a safeguarding case, and they're involved with quite a high number of residents in terms of self-neglect and hoarding. That's something that we're seeing a lot more of. So we're supporting residents with that. Tenants can self-refer, so they don't have to come and ask us for help. They can go online if they want to, or pick up the phone and say, I need this help. and then staff can refer them as well. The team have access to quite a healthy budget, and they can use that to provide that support and emergency measures, such as making sure people have gas and electric, etc. if it's been cut off, need emergency access to food. Any of those emergency situations, they can rely on that budget to make sure that our residents have what they need to be safe. This chart just shows you some of the outcomes. So the first column is the annual benefit increase. So that's the increase for the year for the resident or the tenant themselves. So they've worked with our tenancy support team. They've got extra benefits, access to extra benefits, and as a result of that, their income has been maximised and they have more money coming in, which we hope will mean that they're able to pay their rent and live safely. The second one is one-off benefit gains. So we will work with residents where they just need some help, and that might be a backdated benefit. It might be a one-off payment due to their circumstances. So we record that separately so we can show where we've got those one-off benefit gains. And then the reduction on arrears. So where we're working with someone, we might get them backdated benefits. Obviously, that means that they may get backdated benefits, which might help them reduce their arrears. So we just document that and record that as well to show that as an outcome. Next slide, please. So complaints. So this graph here is showing you the 24-25 complete year and complaints by category. So what I would say is the staff complaints, we are cautious about that because sometimes the complaint can be about the member of staff, but actually the member of staff is just delivering the message that they should have delivered. That won't be proportionate. There will be a slight reduction in there. I think there's no surprise that repairs is our highest category of complaints, and we expect that. We will do over 20,000 reactive repairs every year. It's the biggest service we provide to our residents, so we would expect that that is the biggest area for complaints. So for that year, we had 387 formal complaints. That was a 53% increase on the year before. We expected it. The reason for that is, number one, we are making residents more aware of how to make a complaint. We want our tenants to complain if they're not happy. Our processes, our ways to make a complaint are much more accessible now, so it's much easier for people. We recognise what a complaint is sooner now. So if someone's complaining, we know that, and we will record that quickly. And of course, behind all of that is a very proactive housing ombudsman service, which has led to an increase in complaints. Yeah, so that's all I'll say on that one. So next slide, please. But it comes with challenges, and I think every provider right now is trying to understand what they can do better around complaints. And we're not alone in that. So these are the main points we're looking at the moment. What are we doing to improve? So we are continuing to review our policy and procedures. Every complaint we get gives us a chance to look at, could we have done something better? So we will look at our policy and procedures and see, actually, is there something we can change to make it better for the next tenant that makes the complaint? We're carrying out regular staff training. The housing ombudsman is keeping us on our toes. There is new guidance coming out every day, new spotlight reports, and we have to learn from those. And with that, we have to make sure that our staff know what's going on. So staff training is key. We're making some improvements to our systems. So our computer systems are being improved about how we manage complaints. We think we can do more there to manage them better. And then something that's come out of our tenant perception survey is we're looking at the language we use when we're talking about antisocial behaviour. Our tenant perception survey has identified that we are seeing that when people are talking about how satisfied they were with making a complaint, often that is referring to when they made a complaint of antisocial behaviour. So something in the language there just isn't working. So we're going to have a look at that and see if we can do anything else around that. In terms of timescales, we are relatively meeting the timescales of the Ombudsman. There are a few that fall outside of those timescales, but that would either be because we are trying to work with the resident and they need more time, or that it's a complex complaint and we need more time. But we would always agree with that with the resident. Next slide, please. So we were asked a couple of questions in advance. On the first one, it's probably going to be the same answer, to be honest, is if someone, one of our residents or someone in the community is going to a care home on a permanent basis, they should have an allocated social worker. And we would liaise with the allocated social worker to make sure that their affairs were dealt with, and that included their home. In terms of subletting, that's quite an interesting one. So we've just had a case that we've resolved in the Breckland area, timely. So we don't have lots of reports of subletting. That's not something that comes up a lot for us. We do get them throughout the year, but not big numbers. The neighbourhood officers, they it either comes from neighbours, the report, or it will come from staff just saying, actually, no, I'm not sure this is the person who should be living here. So what they'll do is they will check with other teams who have been in touch with the residents and just see if they had any concerns. We take a picture of the resident when we allocate the home so that we know who's living there. So we will do a visit, we will check their ID against the tenancy photo that we have from the allocation to make sure the person living there is who we think is living there. We'll look at changes in rent payment or any changes in our contact with the tenant in general, which says something might have happened. We'll speak to neighbours. In areas, and this isn't Breckland, but in areas where we have high concentrations of flats, we will check Airbnb frequently to see if there's anything there that is indicating any subletting. But we had a case in Breckland which has just resolved itself. So I thought that was an interesting one just to talk about. And that was a resident who had rented a home elsewhere for work purposes, and they had let somebody who was homeless stay in the property. And we became aware of it. We spoke with the resident. They actually wanted to return home, but the person who was staying there wouldn't leave. So we worked with them, and we worked with Jill and her team, and the person who was staying there was actually owed a duty by Breckland and have now been placed in temporary accommodation, and that's been resolved, and that property is now being, the works are being done, and that will be relet shortly. So it wasn't quick, but it was some great partnership working, Jill, by your team. So it does happen. But what I would say is that we really want to know about it. So if you do have concerns and you do have people telling you that, then please do let us know. You've got our contact details on the presentation. But what I would also just say is that on our website, if you're on the Broadland Housing website, there is a Find My Neighbourhood officer. So that isn't just for residents, predominantly it's for residents, but actually we know a lot of partners use it. If you put the postcode in, it will come up with a neighbourhood officer who deals with all housing management issues. It's got their mobile phone number and their email address, and you're more than welcome to contact them anytime if it's about a certain area. Failing that, of course, you can contact myself or Justin. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Thank you to colleagues from Flagship and Broadland. Thank you. I'm now going to throw open questions, and obviously, whilst they may be directed to one provider, because you've both done similar but also different, coming at the issues from slightly different angles, different web presentations, but all valuable stuff. So feel free, if Flagship answer, Broadland, feel free to chip in and respond, so we're all getting sort of information on the same page, because all of us may have a different proportion of both Flagship, or if we've got some of your stock in our wards, when we have a mixture, it won't necessarily all be one or the other, so the answers will be equally helpful. So first up is Fabian.
Thank you. A couple of questions. And this is my personal experience in an area that represent the Ashwell Ward and adjacent rural areas, when a housing association seems to develop and build their own sites, no one gets to move into the site until all the houses are complete. So there was one in an adjacent village to me, and that was 3 years ago when the Ashwell, and there was people homeless. There was houses completed, but no one actually went onto that site until 45 houses or so had actually been completed. And I'm thinking, if we've got a housing crisis and a shortage, why wasn't people moving in? Because if this had been a private developer, of course, they'd been wanting the money sold and had some houses moved in quickly. So I'd like to know that, and also taking time, and I will just refer to Ashwell, there was some housing association houses actually demolished fairly quickly, but the private houses, when there was a row of terraces, all different landlords, they were all occupied, completed virtually within a year. We've only just really seen at the beginning of this year those housing associations being rebuilt and look like they're on the same footprint. So I'm asking, you don't seem to be helping yourselves. On the normal headline we normally get as well, and I can understand that you've got some older stock there, and I can totally appreciate as a landlord you want newer stock. But we do get the headlines that tenants saying, oh, hang on, I've had to move out of my house, I can't buy it. And then as soon as they have quit, it goes up for auction. But doesn't that seem to be counterproductive? Because if you've got a tenant who's able and perhaps had time to buy that property, and I appreciate it might be at a lesser rate than you'd like at the auction, but you've then, should we say, lost a tenant because they've got onto the housing ladder. That then allows you, with your newer properties, to take someone who is actually on the waiting list. And obviously, as soon as you go and say put it to auction, your tenant is excluded because, you know, it's generally you're looking for a cash buyer for an auction. So I know there may be legal ways there and saying best practice and funding, but I think we need to be looking at those because it gets a negative point to you. And obviously, there's always a waiting list for social housing. We need to be making sure that we're getting that provision adequately shared. But I am a bit concerned about this new builds, and it's not one of those bits, oh, I've heard it down the grapevine. I've seen it myself in 2 fairly localities, and it has been put a lot of anger in villages and a lot of misunderstanding, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's without knowing about the specific site, it's difficult to comment. Obviously, not in the development team. From a relets point of view, Helen, can you think of what there would be a reason they weren't all handed over?
I honestly don't know, but we can take that one away and get an answer for you as to why we would hold that back. In my view, same as you, as soon as they're built, let's get them let. There must be some reason, I'm guessing. So yeah, leave that with us and we can take a look and come back to you on that one.
And then I can take the second point as well, the disposals process again, and not one I'm particularly close with. Essentially, if the resident has the right to buy, that's one thing, but if not, then, and the property is disposed of, it will go on the open market. That might be auction, but increasingly that is going through estate agents. I know we have had residents, I'm aware just from talking to a colleague who deals with it, we have had a resident who's brought up a case very similar to that example you give. I wouldn't want to misspeak, so if I can get the rationale that we provided as a response to that person, that will probably cover off that query and we can provide that as a follow-up, if that's okay.
Yeah, just to come back on that, it is people, shall we say, they're trying to progress themselves. Yeah. They want to own their own home, and particularly I appreciate there's a lot of houses that you still have that are classed as non-standard construction. And I say it becomes very difficult for them to go and get a mortgage, and they say, why have I got to go and look and buy a house or try and achieve one that the housing association is disposing of at auction, similar to mine. I appreciate not in the same village, it's a neighbouring one, and it just doesn't seem right to someone that there isn't that opportunity to go, particularly if they said we were to vacate that property, you would then dispose of it. So I think whether there is some legal difficulties on that, I think it needs to be something worked out, because obviously it makes everything easy for everyone to move forward.
I think a useful question, Fabian, and it might be that providers and with the housing team might be, as with other areas, not just in housing, where there are things like, some things of indication like frequently answered questions, like what may appear to someone to be, this seems to be complete nonsense, and there's actually maybe a legal reason for it, or another reason, or market-based reason, etc. But it may not be apparent, like, here I am, I'm able to pay the rent, I'm able to do so and so, why can't I have first go? So that's something probably that we can work on. I think I've seen Robin Hunter-Clark's hand up next.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your...
So would you sorry, can I come back to the other house? If you've got any comments on that at all?
So on the new development, on the new development thing, I mean, I just don't see that being an issue for us. I'm not aware that that's happened. We will let quite quickly as they're handed over. There may be a week or two for some health and safety things to be looked at, but not longer than that. So I can't relate to that. But what I would say is obviously where we've got market sale or shared ownership, that does take longer, but we would always continue to let the social and affordable homes. So we can go back and check if there's any instances of that. Just in terms of disposal, I think it's a similar thing really is, so we won't dispose of a property unless it becomes empty. Our tenants don't have the right to buy. But what I would say is we now put our disposals on the website. because we had some feedback from some residents who actually said, I'm in a position where I could get on the ladder and actually I might want to buy a property that was being disposed of from a housing association. So they said, why don't you put them on the website? Obviously, they do go through an estate agent, and there's no preference there, but we have now started putting them on the website because it was some feedback that we had. So,
just add to the disposal. Our disposal policy, like Stephanie said, is only to look at disposing at the relet stage. We wouldn't force and encourage anybody to leave home if they did not want to. But these are homes that need significant investment, and whether it's really difficult to bring them up to standards in terms of energy efficiency, or because they're so old and the layout of the home, for example, the staircases are such steep gradients that when we would do a homes health and safety rating system, that they would not comply and constitute a level of risk. So there is a reason, and tends to be the level of investment that was required to bring them up to any standard, which is why they're being proposed for disposal.
Fabian.
Just a suggestion, it might not be feasible to work, but obviously you're going to know a list of those properties that you consider as you've both described. Perhaps that would be feasible to say to the tenants, look, just to make you aware, if in case you were interested in purchasing, if you were to vacate this property, we would dispose of it. And actually, so they're thinking, actually, I'd really like to stay here, and actually give them the opportunity to purchase that place and actually put that thought into their mind. That helps you, that helps that person, and they might want to change how they finance their own sides and say, well, we're prepared to go without holidays or anything else to actually have that chance. But if they've got that potential opportunity has been put to them, and obviously that saves you the point, it saves that nasty backlist of someone then moved out because they bought a place and then found out and very, very happy with the home, despite what you might not think is suitable. It does leave a bad taste in your mouth to think of wanting to buy my own property and move somewhere else where they would have been happy to stay in that, and then find that you've disposed of it once they've vacated. But perhaps to give them fair warning so they can start preparing their own finances. And I think that would be a nice, I'm just thinking if I was living there and living some of that, that would be a nice opportunity, and you've actually given someone a life choice, which would be nice.
Thank you, Fabian. Useful suggestion, as I'm sure it's been noted. Councillor Hunter-Clark, Robin.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your comprehensive presentations. I want to focus on damp and mould, if I may. I think it's so important we get this right, not obviously for obvious reasons, but also in light of the new government regulations. So have you got any further stats on that? I think, Breckland, you did mention a few stats, but I didn't hear anything from Flagship. Average response time on dealing with those complaints would be helpful to know. And also what measures are in place to safeguard vulnerable families, obviously particularly children and the elderly. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly I can get back to you on the stats. I don't have them to hand. Regarding vulnerable residents, we've got a safeguarding referral process, and we've got support in-house, and obviously we can signpost to external agencies. Helen, I don't know if you can expand on that aspect.
Yeah, probably relating that back to damp and mould, we're also doing some proactive work, which I think Breckland mentioned too, but we brought some kind of new roles in to look at where we've done like a bit of a risk rating, but this is more about tenants who haven't raised a repair or haven't given access for a period of time, or we haven't heard from, and actually gone out to target that highest risk area. And actually through that, we've then identified perhaps some people who are more vulnerable, who the regulator termed finding our silence a year or so ago. So we've done quite a lot of proactive work there to ensure we identify those. But equally, if we're seeing that come through the properties with damp and mould, then ensuring that it's not just dealt with from a repairs point of view, but working alongside the housing team, which Charlie touched on earlier about our housing, the system that's built to ensure we cross over the two areas and work together. Hopefully that answers your question.
Is that helpful, Robin? Thank you. Michael.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes,
Thank you for your question. I think as we're getting approaches from different angles on the providers, it may be that, and I hope obviously you're all listening, but as I said, we want to cast more light than heat at these meetings. So we can then say, right, well, one person is asking about fly tipping, perhaps, and that comes to us, perhaps that should apply to us. In other words, are we looking at that? So we're providing those stats across the whole patch. So there may be one block that, say, Michael has over in his ward, which is one particular issue, but it may be a zero problem somewhere else. But it's nice to get that coherent picture. I think, Linda, you've got your hand up next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to put a plea out. Broadland have done it, but I haven't seen it on the flagship website for ward members to have the contact details of the officer they should be dealing with. I had a really good relationship with my previous flagship officer who's told me there is another officer involved, but not who it is or how to contact them. And if you're sitting, particularly with an elderly or vulnerable resident with an issue, and you can, you know, phone or fill a form in with them, it makes a big difference. So not just for the guys here, but for all the housing associations that we deal with across Breckland, and that to be updated sort of 6 monthly or something, that would be really useful. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Very useful point. I'm sure the Breckland's housing team will also have noted that. So if there are any little sort of gaps that we find from our sort of lived experience through residents on the ground, that can be taken forward, rectifying where it needs doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just ask a question about gardens and fencing and what your approach is to, and it is a minority of properties, but there are undoubtedly ones out there where fencing is damaged, removed, broken. Gardens have got all sorts of household appliances, furniture dumped in the front garden. Front and rear gardens which are literally been left where the vegetation's grown up over the top of the height of the 6 foot fencing. What is your approach to that? Do you just sort of say, well, that's a tenant problem, but that obviously has an impact on all the other residents on the estate, and I would say if you get an accumulation of a few of those, then obviously that has an effect on the, I suppose, the psyche of the whole estate. It could garner antisocial behaviour, etc. I want to know what it is you do to get those properties in line. I mean, I've approached Flagship in the past about a lot of sort of like 1960s built, 1950s, 1960s built properties of yours, where you've got old concrete posts, you've got all the, you used to have wire through the post. A lot of that wire's been removed, or that's just hanging there like one big rusty mess. And I have approached you on numerous occasions and quite honestly been really disappointed that you just don't seem to care, frankly. You don't seem to think that that's your issue. I would say it is your issue. They're your properties. I think you've got a duty to make sure that they're, yes, the house itself needs to comply with all the building regs and everything else. But I do think you've got a duty really to make sure that the exterior of the properties, the fence and the gardens and that are maintained to a certain standard. You may have residents who have vulnerable residents that have specific disabilities or mental health challenges where they are unable to do that work, maintaining their gardens, and they need some help. So I'd like to understand how you help those people as well. But I see it as a problem and not one that you are tackling. So could I have a response to that, please?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take the fencing point, and then maybe from a tenancy management point of view, Helen, you can talk about the gardens. Fencing, yeah, it's a challenging one, and it's one that's I've been at Flagship for 11 years. It's probably been something that has been frequently discussed for a while. The challenge we've got is the prioritisation of resources, and unfortunately, a lot of the fencing works are expensive, and we have had to in the past prioritise investment elsewhere. That's not to say that it's not something we can look at. It has changed in recent years, slightly softer approach, but essentially, unfortunately, the approach is that we mark the boundary. That's our legal requirement. That can be done by post and wire. Now, we could debate how good that looks and whether or not that's suitable in some circumstances. In certain circumstances where there is a vulnerability or there is perhaps there's been a domestic abuse case or some other kind of reason, then some target hardening work can be done, or a reasonable adjustment can be made to our standard position on fencing. But essentially, yeah, the post and wire is the minimum that we will do. I mean, if they're rusting and kind of coming away and look awful, then that would require a new post and wire, I would say, rather than just leaving the rusting wire there. So if you've got any specific examples, then please share them with me. If you've got my contact details, you should have them in the pack. I'll be happy to take a look at those for you.
And then from a tenancy management point of view, yes, it is tenants' responsibility, but we should also be working with them. So we've identified, finding out what are the barriers to that, to maintaining their garden. If there was a particularly vulnerable person, then we might help them as a one-off to get back to a position where they're able to manage it or to get something set up. In terms of items in their front garden, you talked about Charlie's covered the damage bit. Sorry, I was just reading back through the other questions you had. But in terms of that, if they're struggling to get rid of them, then we can either obviously signpost them to waste disposal who can pick up a few items at a time, or we can support with that if it's someone who particularly needs that. So again, if they're relating to the same examples, then send Charlie and I through addresses and we can look at, are we already doing something there? And if not, what are the team doing? I can pick those up. Thank you.
So yeah, on the fencing point, it is in terms of fencing, it will depend on the individual's tenancy agreement, what we're responsible for and what they're responsible for. But we have clarified that with residents recently. We did stop doing fencing during the pandemic, so we do have a backlog, but we now have our own fencing team in-house and they are making progress, but it is slow and there is more to do. In terms of front and back gardens, so what I would say is if you're seeing that, tell us. In terms of cases where there are things in front or back gardens, the neighbourhood officer will talk to the resident about that, case by case basis. If we had a concern about maybe a whole street and we thought actually this is getting out of hand, it's more than one person, we have started doing events aimed at cleaning up the community. So we would have an amnesty, and our general ops will take all the fly tipping to the skips as a one-off. And our estates team will come in and try and help people get their gardens back to a good starting point, because it's not easy if it's overgrown and you don't know what to do. So we'll support them with that for them then to be able to take it forward. What I would say is sometimes belongings in a garden are an indication of hoarding inside a home. And if that is the case, then our priority will be inside that home. We will help them to deal with the outside, but the priority will be that they're safe inside to start with. And just in terms of dealing with properties with hoarding, it can be very, very slow. So you might think sometimes we're not doing anything, but actually we're just trying to make progress inside the house so they're safe. Then we'll come back to the garden. But I think if you've got those concerns, we'd rather you just talk to us. And whilst we can't divulge any personal information, we can say, yeah, we're aware of it, and at least maybe give you some assurance that we know about it and we're not ignoring it. That's what I would say.
To come back on that, Roger.
Yeah, thank you for those answers. I think for me, and you're absolutely right, it can be overwhelming for residents when the garden's at that state. In my experience, and I've got more experience with flagship properties, the biggest problem is the previous tenant has either left it in a state or the previous tenant has perhaps passed away. The garden has got completely out of hand, but you haven't addressed that before you've moved another tenant in. So that tenant, from a standing start, they get the property, they need the property, and I've had one where it was a victim of domestic abuse. Moved her into the bungalow, absolutely was needed, but the garden and the challenges that faced her with the garden were so overwhelming, she just, forgive the pun, couldn't see the wood for the trees. And so my plea would be, if you're putting new tenants in those situations, that's not, they're never going to catch up. And I'd really like to see you do some proactive work, make sure the garden's cut back, and at least give them, nobody's saying it needs to be perfect with rose beds and all that, but it needs to be cut, and it needs to be a standard, so they, from a standing start, they've got at least a hope of being able to maintain it themselves.
So I would just say the garden's part of our relatable standard. So that is part of what we will do when someone moves. It's not just the inside of the home. The garden is one of the parts that we'll do as well. And we have residents mystery shopping our relatable standards. And if the garden wasn't up to standard, we would be getting feedback about that. So that is something that we do. But again, if you have any concerns, let us know.
I'll just say, yeah, if there's a case that's recent that's happened, I'd be keen to know, because I will pick that up with the team who dealt with that void. Because for some time now, our relatable standard's been the same, whereby the garden is taken back to, like you say, it's not back to a bowling green, but it's back to a manageable standard, in the same way that the house is cleared and cleaned. It's sort of the last thing that happens before relet, so that it's not where if the house is empty for 6 weeks, we cut the grass at the start and it's grown up again. That ought to be, before the keys get handed over, that's one of the final things that gets done. So again, if there's an example you can share, I'm happy to look into that for you.
Thank you for that commitment. I'm sure that's been noted as well.
Forgive me, Chairman, but I need to leave for another engagement. Thank
Okay,
you very much for your
one more
time
go, and I've got
morning.
Councillor Taylor wants.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
I'm just curious how you manage each of our areas within the district, and whether you have a dedicated officer that looks at those areas. Recently, I picked up some casework from a resident in an Orbit home, and when the team here were like helping me with that casework, it was identified that Outborough didn't actually have a dedicated officer for that area. So obviously that had slipped a little bit. What was going? Do you have dedicated officers that will know the patch that they work with and that can give our residents that support?
Yes, absolutely. There should be a dedicated officer and a point of contact. So that shouldn't be an issue for us. But you said the issue you found was with Orbit, yeah? But equally, let us know if there's something that we can pick up. Thank you.
So again, we have a specific neighbourhood officer for each area, and the neighbourhood officer who deals with Breckland, you can get their details off the website, or we can pass them on to you. But we work in local delivery teams, so we're trying to keep operatives in one area and gardeners in one area, so that we are trying to have staff working in an area so we can get to know residents. And then actually, if something's changed or something's different, you're not reliant on just the neighbourhood officer. You've got a team of staff who actually know that resident or go into that home frequently, can spot those changes. And then if there's something to be concerned about, we can follow up. So it doesn't always work in practice because of emergencies, etc. But that's the kind of model that we're trying to work to, is that it's local, so that we can try and get to know communities and residents rather than people just being numbers, which we hear sometimes, which isn't pleasant.
Thank you. That's helpful. If we can perhaps, recirculate where it's appropriate, that, relevant local information. So when you've got those dedicated staff of that specialist area. Councillor Robin Hunter-Clark, thank you.
Conscious of time, Chairman, so I'll be very quick. You touched on, Flagship touched on rent arrears, and a figure of 3.65 was mentioned. Could you just clarify what that figure is? And also, Broadland, if you could similarly, what's the figure in terms of rent arrears for yourselves? And just very quickly, a plea really, Chairman. I know Councillor Bambridge has already brought it up, but where written responses are required, can we ensure that we get a written response? Because I know in the past we have had instances where we just don't get the information that councillors have asked. So just a plea from myself.
It is now. Yeah, I've already given that assurance, and to the best of my knowledge, most things that we've asked for, certainly in terms of the this committee, we've actually, I can't speak for other committees or for council where the information has actually come out, because I go through things before, not just during, but also follow up after the meeting. I'm happy to take any constructive suggestions or criticisms on the chin, as always. Thank you, Robin.
I wasn't referring to you, Chairman, of course.
I know you weren't.
Other committees.
My conscience is clear. Thank you. Councillor Bambridge.
No problem. So 3.65 is our rent debt as at the end of August. We do see that slightly increase towards the end of the summer, purely because how the majority of our rents are charged over 48 weeks, and where a lot of our tenants will pay monthly, we might see them slightly behind at this part of the time of the year, until they catch up in December. But I can give you, if you'd like, the comparable figure as at the end of the financial year, which would then be the same measure as what you've had from Broadland. Okay.
And I was just going to suggest it might be worthwhile that we send a link through to our financial statements and annual review. These two publications are full of information in detail that is there for partners as well as residents. And we put a lot of time and effort into producing them. So I actually think that is going to cover a lot of what we talked about, but a lot more. And hopefully we'll give you a lot of information that you might actually kind of enjoy reading and might be useful to you. And they're done every year. So I think a learning from this is maybe annually we need to be sharing those local authority partners and members.
Thank you very much for that. Have I missed anybody else? Do you have a question, Gordon? You don't have a question? Are you sure? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any further questions for our housing providers? No further questions. Well, can I thank you for coming along today? You're free to go, you're welcome to stay, because I'm mentioning when we go offline a housing issue at the end. But thank you very much for coming along today. I know we've probably thought of more questions than answers, and particularly after the meeting, but we will make sure that any sort of questions come to you, we'd coordinate those through Ruth, so that everyone is all on the same page. So if someone's asking one question, we don't ask 6 different people asking different questions. It'll all be coordinated and disseminated, and I'll be touching after the meeting closes. That's a very valuable point you mentioned about the annual report and so, because I have looked at all the board reports for all the different and the governance structures for all the different providers. That was my sort of homework. I did that some months back actually before this. And I've actually been to some of the providers, and I know some other colleagues like Councillor Turner have been, where we've really gone into literally the weeds, as it were, of and the detail of actually down to the operative level. So thank you very much for coming today and spending your time with us, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, and we'll look forward to meeting you again in other colleagues in the future and taking up the challenges. And I hope that's been useful for you as well as our colleagues here. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I think it would also be useful if we've finished item 9, if probably Councillor Suggett and Jill and possibly Sarah can also, the two Sarah can also hang around another 5 minutes, if that's possible. Sorry? And Jill, yeah. Sorry. Thank you. Next item is number 9, the outside body feedback. We have forwarded an item from Councillor Peter Wilkinson in terms of the QEH and his work there. We thank him for sending that in. We haven't had any other outside body feedback. Sometimes we've had something for a former member of the Commission, Councillor Kyberg, in terms of Museums Committee and so forth and Records Committee. There's nothing to prevent anyone who's on an outside body from sending that in, and sometimes that's valuable work that sometimes gets reported at full council, but sometimes it doesn't. So some of that work may get lost. It may get reported in different committees, but obviously if anyone is on an outside body who's a member of the Commission, we're very happy to send that out, obviously with the papers, because it contributes to members' understanding and appreciation of the workload of other members. I think Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chairman. This is something we're looking at as we refresh the member pages. So there's no reason at all why reports like that can't be uploaded there for every member. I'm just getting the nod from Ruth because she'll have to do the work. But that would be the best way to disseminate it to everyone.
Thank you. Gordon.
Well, I was just going to add to that. I mean, many members represent the council on outside bodies, and it seems as though perhaps as a council, and maybe this is what Linda is looking at, we have lost the regular reporting that comes back, and all of those members really ought to report to the council, either through council or through this body, but we ought to have a slightly more formal way of doing it. I belong to an outside body and I usually put in 2 or 3 written reports a year. It's quite easy to do. It's just what I've been up to, and I think all members of outside bodies ought to do it, but with some of the new members or newer members on outside bodies, they may not be quite aware of how that should happen. It used to be we had to report through scrutiny, and I think at some stage someone was suggesting we ought to report through council. I don't think it really matters too much where, but we ought to have a path for reporting, and we ought to apply that duty to our lives if we accept that offer.
Thank you. That's a very useful point. That's one of the reasons I've sort of mentioned this. I've also discussed it with our officer to this committee, Ruth here, because some people are, for example, councillors who are representatives on the Norfolk Flood Alliance, etc. And it's useful. We've obviously got one of the executive members here, and senior director, Sarah Shipley, etc. Because that's something that we can look at and take forward. I can take forward chairman both to the executive or senior management team and see how we look at this. You can leave things just to say the members page, which I know every member diligently looks at, but it's also the recognition of the hard work that people do, because it is quite time consuming being on an outside body, but it means that's quite important what we do, because they're representing the council and representing that body back to us. So it's important for transparency that we know what they're doing, what they're saying on our behalf, etc. So we don't want that work to get lost. So it's a point well made. So thank you, Gordon, and thank you, Linda. On item 10, scrutiny calls in, I haven't had any calls in for scrutiny. And under item 11, I haven't had any references of a call for action. item 12, which is our work programme, which we've attached. And at the next meeting, members, which is the 23rd of October, we have the portfolio amongst, in particular, apart from the normal Q1 finance performance and projects report, and like all reports, we will get them in advance, which I've insisted on. We've got a presentation again from Councillor Ashby's portfolio. At a previous scrutiny committee, we had very, very long, extensive presentations from 6 bodies that are acting, if you like, on our behalf as partners, and that taking up a lot of time. I'll be working with Ruth and members on this, but I'll be asking members for any particular areas that they want Councillor Ashby and the team, including Sarah Shipley and others, to actually follow up. So we've done the preparation work. So not just saying, well, what do you want us to present on? We'll look across the board, not the questions, but the actual subject, just the broad those subject areas, so that we can actually, drill down into those, because it's extensive portfolio, inspiring communities and so forth. And what I will do is ask the team to send out through Ruth, just remind people of the areas that are covered by Councillor Ashby, and we see lots of things like grants to organisations, a whole range of things of funding, inspiring communities, stuff that's done with the ICB, a whole range of things. But it's important, if we're going to make use of the time in scrutinising the executive, that we know what we're looking at and why we're looking at, and what answers we would like to have on the day. So I hope that's helpful, Sarah. Thank you. So we've got the work programme attached. If anybody wishes to put forward any items for future work programme, you can contact me direct if any of the codes say, well, we do try and mention this for newer members. We do try and make sure we're doing things in a cycle in terms of the different portfolio holders, so that no one is getting missed off, or no subjects are being missed off, but we're open to, suggestions of things that we want to have on the programme. And if people think we've missed something off, or we need to accelerate it, we're open to any suggestions, as always. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chairman. Under future items, the electrical charging issue, that's been coming on future items for over a year now. So this came through GP, where we granted it. All we've asked for to come back to this committee, and it can be just a short written report, I don't even need an officer here, just to tell us how it's gone and what it's cost the council, please. Yeah. Then we can box it off, to quote Sarah.
I'll be very happy to facilitate and arrange that.
Thank you.
Do my best. Thank you, Councillor Turner. And that's obviously very important issue. If there are any further suggestions, as I said, you can contact us through Ruth at any time. Thank you very much. Our next meeting is going to be on the 23rd of October at 10 o'clock here. And with that, I declare the meeting closed.